Soulful Sauna, Stories of Self-Mastery. Thank you for joining us. It is you, the viewer, that makes this podcast. Your host, Juliette Noske, and her guests are here to share stories of self-mastery, to inspire you and ignite the power of positive change on your own journey. Thank you for being with us. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Soulful Sauna podcast. My name is Juliette, and I'm your host. And today we have the wonderful Mindy Gibbins-Klein. She is an international speaker and a coach who teaches people to be thought leaders and thoughtful leaders. Mindy has authored and co-authored 14 books, and her clients have written and published over 1,000 books. A native New Yorker, Mindy currently resides in the UK, where she runs the book Midwife, an award-winning book coaching brand, as well as the Thoughtful Leader consultancy business. And over the past 25 years, she has presented to and coached over 50,000 business executives and entrepreneurs in 18 countries. Her content has been licensed and syndicated across the globe, and her mission is to create a culture of thoughtful leadership in our society. And her TEDx talk, Sometimes You Need to Change Yourself to Be Yourself, which I highly recommend, I've watched that myself, has nearly 1 million views. Hello, Mindy.
Hello, Juliette. That sounded great. Is that me?
It's funny, isn't it, when you hear people talk about you. I recently had a testimony. It was my best one ever in my entire lifetime. It was my mum, and she wrote me a text message, and it said, "I love your pod. You attract such wonderful people." And she's been listening to my podcast.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. So it's been a long time since we first met. And your work over the last few years has really changed. And I would love it if you could tell us a bit about not recent, but within the last few years, how your work has changed and what maybe instigated that change.
Well, straight in, aren't we? So I did found the book Midwife in 2002, so many years ago. And I have been doing book coaching since then, like you say, hundreds, over 1,000 clients. But I realized it must be about 10 years ago that it was never really about the book. I mean, the book is one manifestation of our desire to teach, to educate, to inspire. It's just one way to do it. And, you know, I love books, but it didn't really seem enough. And some people are never going to write their book. So does that mean that they can never educate or inspire? No. So I began to get into the work of thought leadership at that time. And then that evolved. And I thought, you know, all these people are talking about thought leadership without necessarily knowing what they're talking about. So we need something else. And so I attempted to raise the bar with what I call thoughtful leadership, which to me is more important than thought leadership. So I still do all of the above, like you said, you know, book coaching, thought leadership, training and coaching. But more importantly, I speak and train on thoughtful leadership and thoughtfulness, because I really think that's what we need.
Yeah. And speaking about books, you mentioned a book when I asked you the question about how your journey started. So would you like to share how you think that your self-mastery journey started?
Well, the way I see it, you know, we go along in life and we are influenced by what we read, what we listen to, whom we listen to, and that can happen at any time. So, you know, unless somebody's living under a rock, they're influenced by all kinds of media and people and products. In this case, it was, I won't say, well, yes, I will say, it was in the 1980s. I'm older than I look. And I read a book called The Road Less Traveled by Dr. M. Scott Peck. And it's based on, well, it's based on a line in the Robert Frost poem. And the interesting thing was, I picked it up without knowing anything about it. I can't even remember if someone gave it to me. It was just intriguing. And it changed my life. I still go back to that book every time I can. It's next to my bed. I don't know how many times I've read it or parts of it. And it just got me to think that actually we can live our life at one level, or we can aspire to live it more intentionally. And I wouldn't have used those words way back when, 30 years ago, but that is what I started doing. I became a lot more intentional. And that is at the heart of thoughtful leadership as well.
Fantastic. Yeah. Can you remember anything specifically in that first book that jumped out at you?
I believe the very first line, it's not in the room with me, so I can't check, but I think the very first line is, "Life is difficult."
Yes.
And the funny thing is, when people expect life not to be difficult, that's when the issues arise. But if you already start out thinking, okay, life is difficult, I expect it, I'm going to cope with it, I'm going to manage, and how exciting, because that means I get to find solutions. Then we get a chance to grow and test ourselves. So, and that kind of runs through the whole book. That's not what the whole book is about, but it really is about not doing the easy thing, not doing the lazy thing, taking the road less traveled, because most people don't take, that more difficult path. I like it. I see myself as a bit of a risk taker, but also someone who's not afraid of challenges. That's kind of the same thing. And that's really, I think, what separates risk takers from, people who just want an easy path,
Yeah. Yeah. I love that quote, and I quote it all the time. I probably, sound like a broken record, but it's a very powerful one. And I think it stuck with me a lot as well, is that once you realize it's difficult, you get on with it. You fall down, dust yourself off, and you get back up. Yeah. And so when you've been on your self-mastery journey, do you have like an idea of how you could explain what self-mastery means for you?
I am very blessed to have been in the Tony Robbins environment, same as you, Juliette. It's where we met, in fact. And I learned a lot from Tony and his teachings. And, that was kind of the next step. It was being open to that kind of personal development and what we're calling self-mastery. That allowed me to take that leap. And I went through all the levels. I've attended about 45 events in different capacities. And it's there where I made decisions, because our life is the result of the decisions we make, the quality of our life, and that's, I would say, what I have to think about every day. I don't have to, I just happen to think every single day we make decisions, and they're either resourceful ones or unresourceful, and then things happen, and then we decide what we do with those results. And I do live my life that way, very, very consciously. I'll try not to say intentionally too many times during this interview, but that's what I learned. It's very exciting. Is it easy? Not necessarily, but in a way, it's easier to just follow that path and get better and better at recognizing that you're making decisions, and you have to deal with the consequences of those decisions. And once you realize that, then I think it becomes a lot more fun. So a lot of that happened because of Tony Robbins, and because of all of his content and his methods. And a lot of it happened because I put into practice the content, the messages, the everything I learned, and just jump into things with both feet.
Yeah. And so are there things that you do on a daily or a weekly basis to keep you intentional in your way of living?
As I say, I'm aware, and I become aware at different points during the day. So a lot of people, I think, and I'm sure you agree, sleepwalk through life. So they're not aware, they're not mindful, if we use a sort of trendy term. And therefore they don't have the opportunity to kind of, be just become aware at different times during the day. Certainly when things are happening, something big happens, but at any time. I'm lucky, I'm a smiler. And if I find myself not smiling, something inside me says, oh, okay, I don't have to smile every minute of every day, but, can I improve something about my life so that I'm smiling again? And sometimes I have to smile first, and then everything follows from that. I mean, that's oversimplistic. I have mantras I use. I have just sort of check in with my body. Not meditation. I have done in the past. I'm not so great at sitting still. If people could see me now, I'm just moving all over the place. And, I can do a quick meditation, like a 1 minute, and get myself, back into the state that I'm choosing to be in.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. And do you have, by any chance, a wonderful, interesting sauna story? Obviously, this is called the Soulful Sauna podcast. And
Yes.
the reason is because of all the amazing inspirational stories that I've heard whilst I've been in the sauna. And so, yeah, I'm interested to know, do you have a story?
I have lots of stories. I've had a pretty interesting life, but I'll give you a recent one, and I'll probably be able to get the details right. It was during the pandemic when things kind of slowed down a bit, and I was just taking stock of various things in my life, as many of us did. And I realized that my income had gone up significantly over the years since I started my business. So my income had gone up, but I just had a feeling that my giving had not kept up. And what I mean by that is charitable giving, regular monthly donations to charities. It's something that I set up, years ago. And I just had a feeling that, I hadn't put those up by the same amount as, as I was now earning. So I got my little calculator out. And I don't know if the listeners have heard of tithing. There's lots of charitable ideas out there about what we could or should give. I'm not really into the shoulds, but can you have you ever heard you can give 10% of your net income to charity or to the church is where it started, and then it's given to people less fortunate than ourselves. So I knew my giving was not 10%, but I was curious what it was. And when I did this calculation, my heart sank because it wasn't even 5%. In fact, it wasn't even 1% of my net income. What that meant to me was I'd taken my eye off the ball, but I felt bad that, I wasn't giving back. I wasn't giving, a lot more of that money that I was bringing in from the universe. So it took me about a year to figure it out and talk to people and get a small team together. But it resulted in something that I'm spending a lot of time on, and that, I'm excited about, having launched giving1%.com, which encourages people to just know their giving number and then decide what they want to do with that. And that it's part of thoughtful leadership. It's a thoughtful project. And if people are thoughtful about their giving, I don't care what they do. They don't report back to me, if they start giving more or whatever. But so many people have written to me to say, wow, I never thought about it. Yeah, okay, we don't think about this. Or now I'm inspired to get my number up. Great. There's no pressure. There's no sense that, of should. And then, looking for charities to give to. It's just a great focus, a good energy. And all that happened because I stopped and I became thoughtful about something that I hadn't been giving much thought to before.
Yeah, yeah. Fantastic. So what's it called again?
So giving1%.com. So giving,
Yeah,
number one,
yeah,
percent, the word .com. And we'll put the links in the show notes, I'm sure. So
yeah.
it's all it does is ask people to look at two numbers and to give an anonymous calculation. So they put in their net income, whatever they bring in per month after tax,
Yeah,
and their net and their giving.
yeah.
And so a lot of people may have standing orders and things like that, automatic money going from their bank. So then the system calculates it, and it's all anonymous. And then we're asking people to just click the button that says add their number to the total, because what we're aiming to do is raise awareness and get more people to do the calculation and know their number. And it's as simple as that. And people say, really, well, you're not taking money on the site. You're not looking for my money. No, I'm not looking for your money. It is a little calculator and just something to make you think. That's it.
Yeah, yeah. And do you ever point people in the direction of good ways to offer their money up and to like different charities and
Yeah, so this is the funny thing. I'm not sure if you're aware, and I don't have an accurate number, but I have a feeling there are hundreds of thousands of charities out there, and there's a lot of small charities. So I'm being very careful of, being agnostic about it, not pointing people to specific charities. Having said that, we have a current appeal for charities to share our link, and there's a bit of a quid pro quo. So at least on social media, we're just trying to figure out, the website doesn't want to be cluttered with all these logos. We want to publicly thank any charity who gets their donors to do the calculation. So we're in an awareness building stage. I think where it will go is, people will want ideas. And there are some very, very clever people out there who already do this kind of consultancy. And, I don't want to step on their toes or start doing that. We'll signpost to them probably.
Yeah, thank you. It sounds like a great idea, and I've also been involved in giving money and heard about the 10% as well. And I think that the challenge that I always came across was looking for and finding one where I knew that my money was going to go to a good cause. So I think if people do their research on that part of things, it's very very useful.
But I will tell you one idea that, people usually don't think of. Almost every town and city has food banks. And
Yes.
we know what food banks do. They provide food to people who are having to choose between heating and eating, for example. And I really like the work they do because it's almost all done by volunteers and they're always struggling. And so to give them money to buy food, that to me, doing something locally in your local area kind of connects you with other people in your area. And so that's one of my favorite ideas. I know I shouldn't have favorites, but you can buy the food, in which case you can calculate how much you spent on the food and then drop it off there. That's another thing. But I have standing orders to the charities and the causes that I believe in. And I had to find a couple more when I chose to find a couple more when I thought I'm not giving enough. And that's been nice. It's, sort of making me feel more expansive and abundant.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell me a crazy and fun fact about yourself?
I'm not sure how many people know this because it's not obvious, but when I was 16, I went to live in Argentina for a year, and I'd already been studying Spanish for, I think, 9 years at that point, or 8 years. And I went to live with a family and go to school there, and I needed to pass all the exams and graduate. And so I got very serious about it. And I said, I'm not going to speak any English all year. And so some of the friends I met wanted to practice their English with me. And I was a bit mean, realized, no, I'm here to speak Spanish and I need to pass my exams or I'll have to redo the whole year. And so I spoke no English for a whole year. And that is an amazing way to get better at another language. I think you may know this already.
Yeah, definitely. Immersion within the culture and within the country is very powerful. I did the same in Japan. And then also when I traveled, every country that I went to, because I was traveling for 2.5 years, and most countries I was there for a month or so. And I would have the phrase book and I would practice. And then, yeah. I learnt, I was surprised actually, because in school I'd made a decision that I couldn't speak languages because partly my motivation, I realized, and also the teacher. And then when I went to Japan years later, I learnt Japanese. I learnt to speak, read, and write.
I remember hearing about
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's very powerful if you immerse yourself, and also that strictness of not allowing yourself to slip into the English as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. This goes right back to what we were talking about, the discipline, the decision not to take the easy path. It is a decision, it's a choice. And many people find something hard and quit. And I'm not perfect. There's a few things that I've started in my life where I thought judo, for example, was not for me. It was hard. I might have persevered had I not dislocated a shoulder, but that's another story. There's been a few activities and hobbies and just things that I wanted to learn that I thought no. And the things that I have stuck with, had that discipline and just plowed through, I've been able to overcome those initial difficult stages, and then it gets easier, like the language or whatever.
Mm. Yes, I think with our society today, there is a tendency to slip into things that are comfortable. And I mean, I guess maybe, it's not a new thing, but we are making ourselves more and more comfortable, I think. And even just being outside in the cold, for example, without being able to get ourselves warm again, rather than embracing it, we often will maybe be upset that it's cold and resist it and try and get warm again. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that, the culture of being comfortable that we're in?
Well, it's interesting because I think we have a basic need for not necessarily comfort, but as Tony calls it, certainty, stability, security. And, I lump comfort in there with that. I think it's a starting point. I think if somebody is worried about the basic creature comforts, I mean, this is all over, Maslow wrote about it. I think it's real for many people. If they, don't have a roof over their head and they don't have enough food to eat, and they are in a precarious or dangerous relationship, or so many things, they can't possibly do the things that we're talking about on this podcast. They can't possibly consider self-mastery or any personal development. They've got to sort out the basics first. So, I don't think there's anything wrong with being comfortable. And I really believe it's a choice. So I don't want to make anybody wrong for wanting to stay cocooned in their comfort zone and not, going out there and taking risks and choosing the hard path. There's many paths for a reason. So, I admire those people who choose to take a risk and get outside their comfort zone. But I also like those people who are being true to themselves and say, you know what, I like my life. The issue is if they're not happy and they still stay in that comfort zone, then at some point there's enough friction and, they probably have to choose to do something different. But the comfort zone is not such a bad thing all the time.
Mm. Yes, and that actually reminds me of a story that I recently spoke to a friend, and she said that a lot of the training that she'd learned over the years that we'd done together went out the window when she basically her child was born with a digestive issue where it couldn't digest food. And so she was in hospital with her child for 2 years. And then the following 3 years, they were in and out of hospital. And yeah, she basically said that for 5 years, she's lived in survival mode. And it's completely explaining what you've just talked about there, where unless our basic needs are met, and in that moment, her basic needs weren't met. And as you can imagine, it was quite a horrific situation. And so yeah, the training that she'd done in other areas about, I guess, getting out of her comfort zone, she was out of her comfort zone without choice.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. So yeah, huge learning and growth. But I mean, I can imagine the people out there living in war zones as well. There's other things for them to be focusing on.
That's right. Yeah. And if people listening to us feel comfortable but not completely fulfilled, that's the moment when we can choose to do something about it. But if we choose to stay cocooned in the comfort zone, I'm not judging anyone. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. And I think that's an important distinction to make as well, that you have the choice if you want to move out of it.
There's too many people in our personal development industry, Juliette, who want to guilt people into making changes in their life. And change is always a choice. Like stuff happens, but what we choose to do with it, that is the choice. So, I think in this mode of wanting to be thoughtful and inclusive, to understand that there are different kinds of people out there, just to love everybody and love them on their journey, whatever they choose to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember hearing a story where the guy was saying that there is a mountain and we're all heading up the mountain towards the peak, but everyone takes their own pathway. And I think, yeah, it's good to respect everyone's pathway.
Respect, you used one of my favorite words. Thank you. Yeah.
So looking back, when you wrote your first book, can you remember? That must have been quite a magical moment.
Oh,
Would you like to tell us about the writing of your first book, why and where the inspiration came from?
yeah, I'm happy to tell you and the listeners about it. It was more than a moment, I can tell you. I'll get to that punchline, but basically, when I still lived in the US, I had a friend who developed epilepsy when he fell down a flight of stairs, and he had a very bad time with it. Lots of horrible things happened, drug side effects, uncontrolled seizures. The work folks were not that kind to him, and he was fired when he had a seizure at work. Lots of really dramatic things, and he got depressed and took his own life when he was 27, and I was the same age. And so I didn't really know what to do with that. And I went through all the emotions, could I have done more? And, feeling horrible, guilty, sad, obviously, angry. Then I got angry at the people who were saying, oh, it's a sin to take your life, judging him. And he wasn't there to defend himself. And when I moved to the UK the next year, I had time on my hands. And I was sitting in a Buddhist retreat with my eyes closed, and I was relaxed. This is a big key. And tears were coming down my face, and this gentleman's face came to me, and I just felt like I had to do something for him. And the compassion was flowing, and I thought, I can write his story. He's not here to defend himself. I can write about it. And I had to change a lot of things. Didn't want, people to recognize themselves in this story. But I started writing this story and changed where it happened, well, a little bit, and, different characters. And then I got busy, and then I did a little bit more, and then, so I wrote the whole first draft in about a year, which is pretty good for someone who's never written a book. But then I started sharing it with so-called experts, and they all had their opinions, and I would send it off, and I would hear back or not, and all this advice, oh, you need to do this, change that, da 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 da. And the more feedback I got, the less confident I became. And so I did persevere, and it was when the year 2000 was coming, and I don't know which listeners remember this, but it was this big 2000, all the computers are going to break, everything, we didn't know what was going to happen. And as it turned out, nothing happened, but something happened in me, and I thought, I'm not going to let another year, decade, century, and millennium go by without this book in print. And so I just said, I have to just ignore the 100 plus rejection letters that I'd had. And those were the ones I'd heard from. And I'm going to get this book out. And I found a small independent publisher, and I published it. And it had been 10 years since I had the idea and started putting those thoughts down. I didn't have any guidance. I didn't have any book coaching. It didn't exist at that time. And yet that book changed my life, because back then, so the book came out in 2001 and, everybody was so excited. Self-publishing was just starting. People really had an option to publish, but they found that it was still quite hard to get the ideas out and create the book in the first place. Publishing is actually became easy. And so they were asking for my advice, and I morphed my whole coaching company into a book coaching company, and that's where that all started. So having the courage to ignore all the critics and get that book out, because I had work to do with that. And the book itself, I became a volunteer with the epilepsy charity and still donate money from proceeds of the book. That book had to be written. And in fact, my friend had to go through what he went through in order for everything to be happening the way it is. Now I have that, insight looking back. But thank you for asking about that, because that's where it all started. And I have not written fiction since. Well, I call it fiction. It was based on a true story. But, I can't bring my friend back. But the book has created so much for so many. And if that inspires other people, I'm delighted.
Yeah. And currently you still support people by coaching them through their own birthing journey of their books?
Only if it's an expertise book. I know that's a very specific word.
Yeah.
But because the book coaching, I sold my publishing company, and I am still willing to do book coaching, but very specifically for someone writing about their expertise or experience. I can't coach people through, fiction or children's books or poetry or a historical whatever. That's not what I know. I know business and personal development. So if it's that kind of book, and if someone is willing to start with me when it's still at the ideas stage, and let me help them structure it and then coach them through the writing, then yes. So that's a big caveat. That's a big disclaimer, but I only work with about 3 private clients per quarter. So that's the work I do.
Yeah. Okay. And so your work now focuses more on thoughtful leadership, which you talked about a little bit earlier. Would you like to expand on that?
Yes, certainly. So thought leadership and thoughtful leadership. Thought leadership is showcasing somebody's expertise. So there's that word again. Not just through a book. And in many cases, my work doesn't involve creating a book at all. So for example, in a small business, I absolutely love helping the founders and executives identify a small group of secret thought leaders I call them the secret six, because that's the maximum in any cohort. And I will work with those team members, and each one can develop himself or herself or their self as a thought leader. And that means getting clarity about what they stand for, their content, their messages, creating a plan, and having that certainty about what they're going to write and speak about, and beginning to get things out into the market, and each one with their own personality or personal brand. And this all stems from the work I've done with the books. If somebody could do this for a full-length book, they can certainly do it for a series of articles, podcasts, newsletters, streaming, keynotes. Doesn't matter really what the output is. It is all about that person being consistent and clear and getting exciting, original, thought-leading insights into the world. Now, thoughtful leadership is the next level. And I love doing that work with people who are already clear. They're already what I would call thought leaders. And therefore, they want to differentiate themselves even further. They want to do the important work. They want to have those thoughts and insights like I had when something just didn't feel right about my level of giving, for example, or big ideas that change the world. That's really, really great when, like we were saying, when someone has the basics covered to go to the next stage. So I love doing both. I love doing all of that work with good people and help them achieve great things and meaningful things in their life. I'm not interested these days in doing straightforward life coaching. It's always about their ideas and messages and content. And it's about helping that small business be seen, for the expertise that's inside it, that these secret six.
And do you work with specific companies, and how do you like choose and select which companies you work with?
Well, similar to when I started my other businesses, I started out quite general, and then, I began to think about, now, who do I really like working with? And who I like or love working with are tech companies, software and tech and fintech and health tech, ed tech, all the techs, people who have experts in the business who are not always being seen and heard. And that's what excites me, because that was my background when I was in corporate. I worked in telecoms and marketing for telecoms companies. And the more introverted engineering types were usually not heard and seen. They weren't necessarily writing or speaking or being asked to speak or being invited anywhere. And yet they had great ideas, but because of their personality, they were not always in the spotlight. Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
That's a passion of mine, is to encourage that inclusive spirit. And I call it inclusive thought leadership when we do that, to make sure they're taking advantage of their best assets, and which are their people, of course.
Yeah. And have you ever coached anyone in your family?
I've tried. No, wait. My mother, bless her, she still has a great book out in the world called Realtor Rescue. A realtor is an estate agent. And I had asked her if I could use her dining room for a small course that I was running with 3 people, because that way I wouldn't have to rent a venue. And then I said to her, you're going to have to stay at the other end of the house, and, because I'm going to be concentrating with them and doing all this woo-woo work and all this. And she said, could I join? I was like, you want to join my group course? Okay. She was a superstar. She was the first one to finish writing the book. She attended every webinar. She did and we published the book. And it's just so special. We published one of my sister's books. My husband has done one of my courses. Book coaching is not as intimate as some other kinds of coaching. I mean, there are moments, where I have to bring out the tough love, but yeah, in fact, all three of them have worked with me, and we've done stuff with books, but I try not to do the kind of coaching that's not been invited, if you know what I mean.
Mm.
It's unsolicited coaching is never a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And do you have a book that you're currently reading, or do you read fiction or non-fiction? Do you have one book, or do you have several books at a time? How do you read?
Gosh, I always have a bunch of books lined up on my Kindle. And the reason is I travel a lot. And if I finish a book and I'm on a flight or I'm in a hotel or I've got the next one ready to go. Equally, if I'm really not enjoying a book, I will persevere for a while. But if I feel like quitting, it's so easy to just press the home button and go to the next book. And that we never have any control when we're writing books about how that book lands with people, and we'll never please everyone, right? So I'm not going to name any books. I read about one or two books a week in terms of fiction. I will read some of the trendy business books as well, but I'm being very very picky with what I read, because it's just there's a lot out there, and I've consumed a lot. And one of the things that I'm teaching my clients is how to choose their influences and their influencers. And people often they don't think about it, and they're not aware of who and what is influencing them, whereas I am. So I would rather hesitate and be more thoughtful about it and read less, rather than just consume and get all kinds of ideas and be like what I call the pinball in the machine, ping, ping, oh. We really have to look after ourselves and keep ourselves pure, is what I call it, to just be aware of our influences. I'll stop ranting now, but that's why I am careful and thoughtful about what I read.
Yeah, I think that's especially important in the world today, with so much available to us all the time, and information coming into us at all directions. Spending hours scrolling, whether that's through written text or videos nowadays, and just being aware of what is going into us.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So that was a great tip for those out there who might want to write a book. Do you have any other helpful tips for anyone who might want to write a book?
After all these years, I've noticed that the people who do well, the people who start programs and finish them and finish the book and end up with something that's the right length and angle and content and everything, a book they're happy with, they're the ones who have a strong reason why, and it's the right reason for them. And the reason why I say that is there is, again, a lot of pressure, some outside influences, and people who have big marketing budgets who are marketing the message, got to write a book, you got to write a book. Yeah. No, you haven't got to write a book. I'm saying this to each and every person listening to us. You don't got to do anything. It's a very personal task. It's in a way, and this is where I think my book coaching differs from many people. It's a manifestation of your best insights, your most important thoughts. It's a sacred part of you that goes out into the world. And I say that intentionally and slowly so that people think about it. I don't mind if someone wants to slap together something, speak into a dictaphone, get AI to write it, whatever, and put it out there and, try to make money with it or call it a marketing tool. That's not really a book, as far as I'm concerned. I'm talking about an important, meaningful, personal journey. And like I say, that sacred part of you. and sharing that part of yourself with the world. To me, that means something. And the clients I work with understand that. So if each person listening were to ask themselves, do I care enough to put together that kind of book? Am I interested in that kind of book? I have lots of resources and I have room for a few clients at any time. Or if not, really think twice about writing a book that's not important, because, is it going to add anything to the world? And again, I'm not judging. I just think, your time is precious.
Yeah. Thank you. That's great. And so on your journey of writing books, what was your favorite book that you wrote and why?
I shouldn't really have favorites, but I think the one that changed the direction of my career was 24 Karat Bold. And I think you've seen that one. 24 Karat Bold was a bit of a manifesto in its day. It came out in 2009, so 15 years ago. And it was Seth Godin, who's a very important marketing guru, called it the first thoughtful book he'd read about thought leadership. And I was very excited to receive that as an endorsement. And people began to think about this, about, doing something with their profile, being seen and heard, becoming a thought leader. I thought that's what it was all about at the time, until I realized it's actually about being thoughtful. But it's also, like I say, the basis of everything. So when that book came out, within a few months, I had 8 new clients who had all been kind of lurking in the wings, and they knew what I did. They read that book and thought, I must work with that person. It also led to a very important joint venture, which lasted for 4.5 years. It led to so many opportunities, travel. I got to speak in Hawaii to 1,000 female leaders. Every great thing that you can imagine, podcasts, and well, it was more radio interviews back then. It was wonderful. And I wrote it just at the right time for me. So yeah, I suppose that's my favorite book in terms of impact. Yeah, thanks for asking that question.
You're welcome. I loved your TEDx talk, and it was not what I was expecting when I began watching it. And it was very powerful as well. And this idea that in order to be yourself, you maybe need to change something within yourself. I love this idea. And I mean, that must have been a very challenging situation for you, but how powerful to have that awareness. Can you tell me, what was your biggest learning for you personally?
It really was the punchline of the talk, which became the title of the talk. Sometimes we need to change ourselves to be ourselves. Not every time, not all the time. And what it takes is either for something to happen that makes you wake up and think, oh, what do I want to do with this? And, do I look in the mirror instead of, just looking outside and pointing the finger? Or sometimes people need to disrupt something. And, it started with a bit of a rant about how many people say, just be yourself, and that's not always easy if somebody doesn't know who they are or doesn't like who they are. And that goes on all around us. I mean, there's probably more people than we realize who don't feel right, or they don't feel clear, or they don't feel like themselves, whatever that means. And that's a great starting point, because then we can choose to do something with that. So I'm being very vague on purpose. People have to watch the talk if they want to. But the message that I would give anybody is to just stop every day or several times a day and just go inside your body. I do a very quick scan of my body, how am I feeling? And if something doesn't feel right or we're not feeling fulfilled, what are we going to do with that? What do you want to do with that? And the answer might be nothing. Put the blanket on, stay cuddled up in the comfort zone. That's fine. But at some point, if there's enough friction, like I say, if you're not feeling like you're being your best self, if I put it that way, then there's a number of different ways in which you can remedy that. And I'm always happy to have a chat with people about these kind of things. This is back to my own coaching training. We're those of us who are intuitive coaches, we know that people are going through stuff all the time. So I'm always happy to listen to, somebody, but if they ask for my advice, they might get some tough love.
Yeah. And would you like to share one of the things that you had to change about yourself in order to be yourself?
Funny enough, I'm going to mention thoughtfulness, being thoughtful, because I'd already written the book when I was asked to do the TED Talk, but I wasn't living the principles in the book necessarily. I'd written it for other people. There's some stories in The Thoughtful Leader, which came from real conversations. People were struggling and they had real fears and other emotions. They'd set up in business and it wasn't all it was cracked up to be. And, I was really writing it for other people. But then I realized, wait a minute, a lot of these things that are going on for us just require a bit more thought or a better quality of thinking. And we need to dedicate time and energy to that because it's not just going to happen. And that became a practice for me. So I don't have a set time. Like I say, I don't sit and meditate for 20 minutes or 30 minutes. I can do this at any time. And I do what's called quick thinking, just to stop and quickly think through something. And the more you do it, the quicker you can become. So I think for me, that was the best gift. And I now want to give that gift to as many people as possible. If people just think through and consider, that's a big part of it, consider everything they're choosing, consider other people, consider the next steps, that they will feel much better as they take those steps.
I think also the next step is maybe the hard one, is then taking action on those things. Sometimes we maybe know what our heart wants, and then the other mind comes in and talks about whether it's, profit. So that can be on a simple case of needing to feed the family. So, or, wanting to gain more, or that can be because of fears. The fears come and come in and start shouting in our heads. So what would you say? Because we can sit there and be thoughtful, but then those next steps are the challenging ones. Do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, so this is where thoughtful is different from mindful. So mindful is you become aware of things. Thoughtful leadership in my model of the world and in the methods described in the book does involve action. So, being thoughtful about what steps you're going to take and, writing them down, making them happen. So it goes beyond just the awareness and, figuring stuff out. It has a direction, it has energy that is taking you towards a solution. So it's directed.
Thank you. Yes. They always say that that's the secret to the secret is taking the action.
Yes. Well, always has been, always will be.
Yeah. Thank you. So with your years and years of wonderful experience, is there any advice out there you would like to give someone on their self-mastery journey?
Hopefully, this message has come across loud and clear. What I'm going to say is recognize that we have multiple opportunities each and every day to stop, take stock, be thoughtful, figure things out, consider things for a bit longer or from a different angle, let's create that time, slow down. And part of that involves, not just consuming all those influences as we were talking about, and just valuing your life and your life choices enough to do it thoughtfully. That it sounds simple. I think it is simple, but it's not always easy to switch other things off and to prioritize that time. And as I said before, when you begin doing this, it gets faster, you'll get better at it. And it's so rewarding to make what are the right decisions for yourself. So yeah, I have loads more advice, but that's my best tip.
Yes. And I have that image of you when you said you're in the Buddhist center and you were meditating and you had your eyes closed and you had the image of the guy whose story you needed to share, and pausing and slowing down and making space. I think these are key things which are maybe not the direction that things are going in at the moment where they're speeding up. But I think this is the key, is giving ourselves that space and that permission to slow down or pause or even stop for a moment. And that's when the magic comes in those moments as well, because not only do we allow ourselves to think, we have space to think, we also allow messages to come in from the greater consciousness, or
Yes.
wherever they come in from.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people know this, but then they have to take control, and that we have to remember that we do have more control than we think.
Yeah.
And then we can choose to, make changes.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, it's been wonderful having you on the podcast, Mindy.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you would like to say before we say goodbye?
Well, I know podcast guests, they put their links in the show notes, and they say contact me, and I really mean it. I love chatting. This is one of my favorite things to do. I always make time for people. Especially if somebody's going through something. I'm blessed with having a lot of time now, having sold one of the businesses. So contact me, and I mean it. Be in touch, stay in touch, connect, and connect with each other and connect with your heart. And, you can't go wrong.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Wonderful to have you here, and hope to speak again soon.
Thanks, Juliette.
Bye. Thank you to Matt and Ken at Thermalux UK for offering their saunas as a space for me to record my podcast in. Soulful Saunas, stories of self-mastery.